All right, what's on tap for Pitt when Cal comes to Acrisure Stadium this Saturday? 3:30 kickoff for the Panthers and the Bears coming to Acrisure Stadium. It's a big one for Pitt, obviously. It's a big one for Cal coming across the country and playing an afternoon game that amounts to 12:30 on their body clock, I guess. If their bodies are still on West Coast time, then Cal will be playing at about 12:30. So nice of the ACC and ESPN to give Cal that game, not to screw with their schedule too much, as opposed to putting Miami in a game that basically starts at like 1:30 in the morning for them. But I digress. Huge game for Pitt and an opportunity to get to 6-0 for the first time since 1982, and it's not going to be easy. I think Cal's going to prevent a challenge. I mean, who knows? Maybe it'll be easy. I don't know. You never really know how these games will go, but I think Cal's going to present a real challenge for Pitt. I think there are some key players that Pitt's going to have to watch out for, some key challenges they're going to face. Let's talk about that today. Let's talk about some of the key guys for Pitt who have emerged so far this season. Let's talk about some of the key challenges Pitt's going to face against Cal on Saturday, and then if we have time, and I think we will, we'll talk about some of the other notable games, some games to keep an eye on this weekend around the ACC and the world of college football that are going to be relevant for you as a Pitt fan and relevant for Pitt as a team that's hoping to get to 6-0. If they do get to 6-0, there's going to be some games around the country that will impact where Pitt stands in the national ranking and among that ever-dwindling list of undefeated teams in the country. It's a huge game on Saturday. Let's start looking at a few of the angles right here on the Morning Pitt, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, one of my things this week is how, and I'll write about this in the 321 column tomorrow for sure, but one of my things this week is about how it's fun when the team you cover or the team you follow has some success. Like a 5-0 start for Pitt, it's fun because now things just mean more. You know what I mean? There's a little bit more riding on it. When Pitt was like stumbling through the mire of last season, like nobody cared about Pitt. There was no interest in Pitt other than mockingly from afar. Nobody really cared. There was no, like I said, there was no interest because they were ultimately a 3-9 team. A team that had 2 wins until the 11th game of the season. And so, no, there's not going to be a lot of interest in that. But when you're 5-0 and you've got an exciting quarterback, an exciting offense, an exciting running back, and you've got a couple of wins over power conference teams on the road, you start getting noticed a little bit. You start getting ESPN articles written about you. You start getting votes and rankings. You start getting talked about as a dark horse college football player. And all of these things are entirely premature, but also entirely a reaction to the success that Pitt has had. And it's fun when you get in those situations. It's fun having games that matter. And this is what I remember back from 2021. It's what I remember back from 2018, is that Pitt was in situations where the games matter. Situations where the games matter. And that's fun. That's exciting. Because now being at 5-0, like, this Cal game is huge. This Cal game is huge because this Cal game, if you win this game, not only do you get to 6-0, not only are you 2-0 in the ACC, you're probably going to jump into the top 20. We'll talk about that in our notable games to keep an eye on. You've got a decent chance to jump into the top 20 nationally, and you're really considered one of the top 3 teams in the ACC, which is where Pitt should be considered right now, and where I think I already consider them there heading into this weekend. And that momentum will just keep growing, and the expectations will keep growing, but the importance and the significance will keep growing. Because this is crazy to say because it doesn't feel like we should be this far into it, but this is game number 6. This is the halfway point of the season. And I think if you win this one, if you get to 6-0 and you're undefeated through the first half of the season, I think you can pretty much push aside talk of being a fluke because you've won half the games so far. You've played half of your season's games and you've won them all. And so I think there's a lot riding here. Now, I mean, obviously, the next 7 games as a whole will tell the story for this Pitt football team this season. There's a whole lot riding on this week's game, just like there was a lot riding on the Carolina game. And if they win this one, there's going to be even more riding on the Syracuse game. And if they win that one, there'll be even more riding, you know what I mean? So on and so forth. You keep kicking that can down the road because the more you win, the more it matters. And it's exciting to have a team that you follow or a team that you cover matter. It is. And I say that as, objective journalists and all that kind of stuff. It's exciting to cover a team that matters. It's far less interesting and far less exciting to cover a team that has 2 wins through the first 10 games of the season, which was the case last year, right? And so this is fun. And I think it's been a fun week. I think it's been exciting looking ahead to, what this season could be and what this week is and all of that. And now we're getting that much closer. Today's Thursday. The game is in 2 days. Depending on when you watch this video, we might be inside that 48-hour window. And there's definitely, I think, some interesting matchups in this game. Don't forget, as we always ask you to do, like this video and subscribe. YouTube.com/Panther-Lair.com. It's a place to get all of your Pitt video coverage, everything you can possibly hope for. Whether it's these daily Morning Pitt videos or our weekly live stream that we do every Wednesday night. We did it last night with Jim Hammett and me from 8:30 to 9:30 every Wednesday night. Or our post-game shows. And we'll be live on Saturday, 3:30 game. I'm guessing probably around 9 o'clock. We'll shoot for going live at 9. And that all happens right here at youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Those live streams are always a lot of fun, and hopefully you get a chance to be a part of them. And don't forget the website, Panther-Lair.com, Panther-Lair.com, Pittsburgh.rivals.com to get all your Pitt sports coverage. Pitt football, basketball, recruiting, everything going on in the world of Pitt sports is right there at Panther-Lair.com. Yesterday we had an interesting conversation with Brandon George. Pitt senior linebacker, guy who's playing more snaps than he's ever played, making more starts than he's ever made, making more tackles than he's ever made. Brandon George is having the best season of his career. It's not even close, and it's not even like there's anything subjective about that. That is very much an objective observation. Brandon George is having the best season of his career. He's never played this much. He's never produced this much, and I don't think he's ever played this well. Because even when he got his limited snaps over the past 5 seasons, he's now in his 6th year of eligibility. Even when he got limited snaps over the past 5 seasons, I don't think he played as well as he's been playing this year. Brandon George is currently 4th leading tackler on the team with 34 tackles, 2.5 tackles for loss, 1 sack, 1 fumble recovery, 1 forced fumble. Obviously the blocked punt recovery against West Virginia that he took in for a touchdown. He's having his best season and playing at a really high level. And I think he's emerged as something of a catalyst, linchpin, engine, heart and soul, whatever you want to call it. That's what Brandon George is for the defense and maybe even by extension the team. I don't know where, I don't want to go so far as to say the team, but I definitely think for the defense, Brandon George is, he's the straw that stirs the drink. Pick your cliche of a guy who's just really freaking important to what's happening. And I think that's Brandon George. And I think the rest of the team, I think his teammates look up to him. I think they respect him. I think they appreciate him. I think guys who have been around for a while have a certain appreciation for Brandon George and how long he's been around. We were trying to make a list yesterday of people in the Pitt football program who have been around longer than Brandon George. And I asked some other people, we couldn't think of many. Pat Narduzzi, obviously. Randy Bates, obviously. Corey Sanders and Archie Collins. Chris LaSala, the football operations associate athletic director. He's the guy who's been around Pitt football for a long time. Bob Junko, although Junk retired, although he's still around every day. He's the hardest working man in retirement. But and Danny Kazusko, who's an assistant equipment manager, has been around longer than I have. He's got years on Brandon George. But it's only 5 or 6 people in the entire Pitt football program who have been around longer than Brandon George. But for the last 5 years, he really didn't do much with all of that time. For the last 5 years, he really didn't have much to show for it. He was always behind Servassier Dennis or Shane Simon, mostly those guys, over the past few years. He was always playing behind someone. And he had 1 year, I think the COVID year, he had 18 snaps at fullback. He had a handful of snaps on the defensive line. He bounced around like that. He was mostly a special teams guy and a reserve middle linebacker who didn't see all that much playing time. And so with all of that as context, I think his teammates who have been around for a while respect that he has stuck with it, has stayed it out, has continued working, and now is out there not just playing, not just getting snaps, but but making the most of them, getting meaningful snaps, making meaningful plays. The fumble return against West Virginia, a huge fourth down stop at North Carolina on Saturday. Brandon George is playing at a really high level, and to his credit, he credited a lot of his teammates for that fourth down stop as well. But Brandon George made the play, and I think he's playing really well. And that goes for the linebackers around him too. You guys know what I think of Pitt's outside linebackers. I think the stats back it up. Kyle Lewis, second on the team in tackles with 42, second on the team with tackles for loss with 6.5, third on the team in sacks with 2. He's got 2 interceptions, officially 7 quarterback hurries and a forced fumble. Rasheem Biles on the other side, 40 tackles, which puts him third on the team. 8 tackles for loss, which puts him first on the team. 2.5 sacks, which is the second most on the team. A bunch of pass breakups, and just generally explosive, exciting splash plays coming out of Rasheem Biles. Those guys are playing at a high level. Are they perfect all the time? No. Do they need to be? Yeah. They need to be closer to perfect because, again, they're going to get tested on the perimeter by this Cal offense. Now, I think Cal's offense, by the numbers, they're not great. They're averaging like 26 points per game. All those red zone stats I talked about earlier this week, I didn't just calculate Pitt's red zone stats. I took the whole country, the whole FBS of red zone, performance and put them into the spreadsheet and got the formulas and everything. And, just as Pitt is inside the top 25 in all those categories, whether it's red zone points per possession offense or defense, touchdown percentage offense or defense, a touchdown percentage within the red zone I'm talking about. Pitt's top 25 in all of those categories, offense and defense. Cal is down around 100 in all of those categories. Like if you look at their, let's say, offensive points per red zone attempt, right? Cal, you think you have it. Cal is number 106 in points per red zone attempt. So they average less than 4 points per red zone possession. In red zone touchdown percentage, like how often Cal scores touchdowns out of the, from the red zone, they are number 99 nationally. They have 11 touchdowns on 20 red zone possessions. That's 55%. That's not great. Now Pitt is up north. They're at 75% touchdown. In the red zone, 18 touchdowns on 24 possessions. A team like Navy is perfect 100%. They're batting 1,000. They have a touchdown every time. Defensively, Cal is about the same. They're outside the top 100 in points per red zone attempt allowed, and they're outside the top 100 in points in touchdown percentage. So just like I said, Pitt scores a touchdown on 75% of its red zone possessions offensively. Cal allows a touchdown on 73% of the red zone opponent's red zone possessions. Okay, so not a great red zone team. I think we'll get into Pitt's offense versus Cal's defense in a second. Okay, so set the defensive numbers aside, but they're not a great red zone scoring team. Jaden Ott obviously is the big weapon there. He has 66-yard I think touchdown reception against Miami. One of the big plays, the biggest play of Ott's career, I think, and obviously one of the biggest plays in that game. Although Cal ended up losing. Good runner, lots of speed. Doesn't force a lot of missed tackles. I think just uses his speed to create separation and get away from guys. His passes, this is very interesting. I was looking on Pro Football Focus. Ott has been targeted in the passing game 12 times in 3 games this season. 12 times in 4 games, this season. His average depth of target on his 12 targets is minus 0.5 yards. So what does that tell you? How are they using Ott in the passing game? It's a lot of screens. It's a lot of throws behind the line of scrimmage. He's run about 16 passing routes per game. He's got 64 on the season. Routes that he's actually run, he's been targeted 12 times. He's got 11 catches, averages about 10 yards per reception. But just like North Carolina wanted to use the screen game to stress the perimeter of Pitt's defense, I think Cal is going to attempt to do the same thing. The quarterback, of course, is Fernando Mendoza. Threw for, I forget what he had against Miami. He threw 2 touchdowns and an interception against Miami. I think he was 11 of 22 for 285 yards. Obviously his long pass was the 66-yard pass to what's his name? Ott. The key with Mendoza, I mean, this is going to go down in the annals of obvious football analysis, but you got to hit him. Ott this season has been sacked 18 times, or I should say, Cal has allowed 18 sacks this season. I said Ott has been sacked 18 times. Mendoza has been sacked 18 times this season, or Cal has allowed 18 sacks. Mendoza himself has recorded 38 rushing attempts. So if sacks will count as part of that. He's got one rushing touchdown, I'm sure, on a few of his carries. Pro Football Focus said he scrambled about 14 times. I'm sure a few of those he got out of bounds or slid, but he's taken a lot of hits. So, I mean, you could look at, close to 20 sacks. You can look at 14 scrambles where he's getting hit a few times. There's been a handful of times this season where he's been hit while he's throwing. He's taking a lot of shots, and he took some shots in the Miami game. And, Cal says he's fine. Everything's going to be okay. Wilcox, the head coach, says he's fine. He's going to be okay for the Pitt game. But he's getting knocked around, and he's gotten knocked around quite a bit. And I think one of the underrated, I don't want to say storylines because I don't know if it was big enough to be a storyline, but one of the underrated sort of elements or happenings in the North Carolina game, in Pitt's win at North Carolina, was how much they hit Jacoby Criswell. Only got the one sack on the final play of the game, and people were arguing with me about whether the pass rush was good throughout the game. And I said, they're getting to him, they're pressuring him, they're not getting the sacks, but they were getting after him. I think officially 11 quarterback hurries. They were getting after Criswell, and they were hitting him. And they pointed it out on the broadcast, and you could see it. A lot of times he was holding his ribs, holding his side as they were coming back to the huddle in between plays. You start hitting a quarterback like that, it's going to have some lingering effects, either in pain or just in fear, and creating, start hearing some footsteps. That's how you can bring that pressure or even simulate the pressure, which I think is one of the things that Pitt is really good at, particularly on third down, where Cal is not especially great. I think they're under 40% on third down conversions, which is okay, but not great. I think especially on third down when Pitt uses that Delta defensive package with 3 down linemen and 3 linebackers and 5 DBs, and sometimes they'll look like they're going to rush 7 and they'll rush 2. And sometimes they'll look like they're going to rush 3 and they'll bring 6 or 7. We've seen them rush 7 even at crucial moments in games. I think even in the Carolina game, there was a point, I wrote it down, they rushed 7 kind of late. It might have been on the it wasn't on the final. But they really disguise their pressure well, particularly on third down. And if you can hit Mendoza a few times, get him a little jumpy about that pressure, then you don't actually need to bring 6 to have the quarterback react like you are bringing 6. You can tease that pressure. You know what I mean? You can disguise it. You can make it look like you're bringing 4 and have him think you're bringing 6, or make it look like you're bringing 6 and actually only send 3, but still have him scramble or get panicky in the pocket. I think that's going to be the key. As far as Ott goes, when he attacks the perimeter, when he tries to stress Pitt's outside defense and perimeter defense, I mean, you have to take good angles and you have to make the tackles. Period, point blank. It's really that simple, because you don't want to let him really get into the open field and take off. He's probably, among the fastest running backs Pitt has seen this year, and you can't let him get into those openings. On the other side, probably the biggest storyline is that Cal gets turnovers, right? They have 11 interceptions, 3 forced fumbles, 1 recovered this season so far. So that's 12 turnovers through 5 games. That's really the biggest thing to watch out for, particularly the 11 interceptions. I think Cal, from everything we're able to gather, seems to do a great job disguising what they do, great job not really showing their coverage or messing with the quarterback's eyes. And so that's going to put a real premium on, obviously, the play of Eli Holstein and the game planning and play calling of Cade Bell. Cade Bell, I think, has an A grade so far. He's not without his imperfections and maybe slip-ups here or there, but I think it's hard to give him anything less than an A through the first 5 games of the season. This is going to be a real test for him. This is going to be a real challenge for him to try to get a read on what Cal wants to do and how Cal is going to attack Eli Holstein and the kind of coverages they're going to show him and the kind of coverages they're not going to show him. And then make sure Holstein is equipped with the tools to handle what he's seeing. This might be the kind of game where it starts a little bit slow. This might be the kind of game with an interception in the first quarter or something like that, where because you're not entirely sure what that coverage is. And Holstein, who is, for all of his accomplishments, still a redshirt freshman, maybe doesn't have a great read on what he's seeing out there. That was, he made a mistake against North Carolina. He's made mistakes this season. I think it's interesting that Pro Football Focus, I tend to stick to their more objective stats, but they do have some subjective numbers that I try to look at, like turnover-worthy plays. And I think, turnover-worthy play, that's in the eye of the beholder, right? But we'll take their numbers and just consider it. According to Pro Football Focus, Eli Holstein has had 9 turnover-worthy plays so far this season in 5 games. And that's a lot. That's more than 2 per game. You can't have your quarterback putting the ball in jeopardy like that. And this is kind of a great example of how we don't entirely take these numbers to be, take them as gospel. So they have 9 turnover-worthy plays. 7 of them were in the first 2 games. 3 against Kent State and 4 against Cincinnati. Pro Football Focus charges Eli Holstein with 1 turnover-worthy play against West Virginia and 1 in the North Carolina game this past weekend. Obviously, I would take an issue with that. One of his plays actually did result in a turnover, the interception, the pick 6 early in the game. And then there was the throw on the final drive that very much was a turnover-worthy play. So we're not entirely convinced about Pro Football Focus's numbers here, but I would say that I think he has gotten better at protecting the ball in the last few games. Youngstown State really wasn't a problem at all, but I think even West Virginia, he did a better job as the game went on, and I think against Carolina, after that pick 6, not counting that throw at the end of the game, he did a pretty good job protecting the ball. That's going to be a real priority. You still got to take your shots. You still have to try to make plays in the passing game, but you can't give Cal what they're looking for, which is short fields and turnovers. You've got to take care of the ball, and that's going to be on Holstein to make good decisions and not be too risky. And that's going to be on Cade Bell to make sure that Holstein is properly prepared and adequately prepared for what Cal is going to show him. It's got to be about having good plays and drawing up good schemes and things to get the receivers open. But you've also got to make sure Eli Holstein is prepared for what he's going to see. You have to prepare his eyes as much as you prepare his decision making, and that could be a tricky thing to do. And I think there might have to be a little patience. Early in this game. Excuse me. If Pitt's offense sputters a little bit, and if Pitt's offense, even if there's a turnover, I think there's got to be a little patience because it could take Holstein and Bell a little bit of time to figure this defense out. All right, gone a lot longer than I expected talking about that. I wanted to get over a couple games to watch this weekend. There's 12 undefeated teams in the country. Pitt is one of them. Liberty won on Tuesday night, 31-24 in overtime against FIU. And so that's another undefeated team that's going to stay undefeated. Navy, Miami, and Indiana were all off. Or they're all off this weekend, so they'll stay undefeated. But the rest of these undefeated teams, that's 1, 2, 3, 4, not counting Pitt, 5. So these other 7 undefeated teams are all in action this weekend. Texas at Oklahoma. Oklahoma's 4-1. That's obviously a huge game. It's an SEC game this year, but it's still a huge game nonetheless. Penn State is at USC. USC's 3-2. It's a 3:30 game. Penn State's got to travel across the country. First, Penn State has to drive all the way to Harrisburg. And then they have to travel all the way across the country. I don't know which part of that is worse. The flight to LA or the drive to Harrisburg. Ohio State's at Oregon. Another one drive. I wonder if Ohio State has to drive to Harrisburg too. Man, this is just terrible. And the whole Big Ten, if they want to fly to play USC or UCLA, has to drive to Harrisburg. So Harrisburg is the only place in the country that has flights to Los Angeles. Ohio State's at Oregon, probably the game of the weekend. That game at 7:30. BYU is at Arizona. Arizona's 3-2, so interesting one there. Iowa State at West Virginia, another 3-2 team hosting an undefeated team. Army's going to UAB. UAB is a disaster. They're 1-4. They stink, and they've just been bad. And it looks like Trent Dilfer's a worse coach than he was a quarterback. Those are the undefeated teams. Like, at least one is going to lose, right? Because Ohio State's playing Oregon. They're both undefeated. So at least one of those teams. So we'll be down to, at a maximum, 11 undefeated teams after this weekend. And then I think probably a couple other. Look, I didn't think 7 undefeated teams were going to lose this past weekend, and that's what ended up happening. There were 19 undefeated teams heading into this past weekend. There's only 12 coming out of it. So you're going to get some surprises in here. I mean, I'm looking at Penn State going across the country to USC as a potential upset alert. I don't know. I'm with everybody else in totally selling Lincoln Riley, but travel across the country. I mean, we were talking about this in the NFL for years, right? About teams having to travel across the country. That'll be an interesting one. And then I think you'll get an upset or two in there. You could be down to single-digit undefeated teams heading into next week. And if Pitt takes care of business, they could be one. If Pitt takes care of business, they're going to have an opportunity to move into the top 20. Panthers are number 22 right now in the Associated Press poll. Missouri falls to number 21 after getting throttled by A&M last weekend. They're going to UMass. UMass is 1 or they're not going. Yeah, they are going to UMass. Excuse me. UMass is 1-5. Missouri should have no problem winning that game. And then you've got these 3 teams that are all tied at number 18. Indiana, who's off. Oklahoma, who's hosting Texas, one of those undefeated teams we're talking about. And then Kansas State is at Colorado. Colorado's 4-1. You get a couple of losses in that group, and then you're going to have the possibility. Oh, and the other one is Utah, number 16, is at Arizona State. Arizona State's 4-1, so maybe a possible opportunity there, for an upset for Arizona State to get that win. Boise State's going to Hawaii. Boise State's number 17. They should win that game, I would think. But you get a couple of losses among those 3 teams that are tied at number 18, or maybe Utah. You get a few of those teams to lose, and if Pitt can win, I think a move into the top 20 is pretty likely, and then they're off next week because they have a Syracuse game the following Thursday. So maybe if you don't make it to 20 into the top 20 this week, maybe you climb in with another loss or 2. So some big opportunities out there. Obviously, Pitt's biggest opportunity is against Cal on Saturday, but there's some other games out there that I think could open up an opportunity for Pitt to continue climbing the ladder and continue getting more and more national respect. This is what I said at the very beginning. Like, it's fun when you're in these kind of situations. It really is. It's fun when your games matter. And when other teams are looking at it and saying, all right, well, Pitt, that's one of those undefeated teams. They've got Cal at home. I don't know. That might be a tough one for Cal coming across the country. Like, it's fun when you have these kind of it's fun when your games matter. And right now, Pitt's games matter. All right, we got the mailbag tomorrow. Go to the message boards at Panther-Lair.com and post your question for the Morning Pitt mailbag. Look forward to as many of those as we can get, and we'll try to answer as many of those as we can get. Look, we went almost a half hour today. We can do it again tomorrow for the mailbag. So tune in or post your questions and then tune in for the mailbag tomorrow. And don't forget our live show Saturday night, probably around 9 o'clock, the post-game show as we recap Pitt-Cal. I can't wait for the game. I'm sure you're excited as well. Just got to get through another 48 hours or so, and it'll be game time. So thanks for tuning in today. Really appreciate it. Make sure you like this video and subscribe, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. And we will catch up with you tomorrow for the Morning Pitt mailbag right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.